This is an interview with Ilse Schwab Stahl, conducted on February 10th, 2005, at the Virginia Holocaust Museum in Richmond, Virginia. The interviewer is Inga Horowitz and videographer Chuck Weitzenhofer. Mrs. Stahl, could you please state your full name and spell your name for us?
In what?
Spell your name, please.
Oh, Ilse, I-L-S-E, Schwab, S-C-H-W-A-B, Stahl, S-T-A-H-L.
Where were you born?
In Furth, Bavaria, Germany.
Spell Furth, please.
F-U-E-R-T-H.
Okay, thank you. And what is your birth date?
March 10th, 1920.
Thank you. What languages do you speak?
Now,
Yes.
I speak German, of course, English, and once upon a time French.
Where were you living? And please just describe for us your life between 1920, when you were born, and the period of the Holocaust.
Well, I lived with my parents in Furth. My father was a chemist and pharmacist. He owned a small factory, and we were very comfortable. We lived in an apartment in the city, and since I was the youngest of a fairly big family, I was the spoiled brat.
How big was your family? Who were your siblings?
I didn't have any brothers or sisters, and I had a number of cousins, but they were very much older than I am, due to my father getting married at the age of 43, and his oldest brother was 16 years older than he was.
Oh. So this is the large family you
Yes.
described. So your father and mother's siblings were living in Furth too?
No, my mother came from Berlin, and my father actually came from Bernburg in Anhalt, which is a northern city in Germany. And after the war, the First World War, he settled in Nuremberg because we had family there, and that's where he started his factory.
So this extended family you talk about, and you were the youngest of the cousins, where were they living?
They were partially in Berlin, some lived in Breslau, and a number of them lived in Nuremberg, some were in Stuttgart.
Of this extended family, did they survive? Who survived?
We were very, very fortunate. I had only a cousin of my father's died in Theresienstadt, but he was the only one that I can think of that perished
in the Holocaust. All the others somehow escaped, left?
Well, most of them had left. In the years after the early Nazi takeover, everybody thought, oh, this can't last. So why should we move and start all over again? Especially the older folks thought so. My father was in his 60s when he left Germany. And at that age, it's rough when you have to start and have no real background that you can rely on.
But all of these people who were older than he, and...
No, he was one of, well, some of them. His two brothers had died before,
I see.
but his two sisters were still living.
And they left. They
Yeah,
got
well, one of them left in 41, and she and her daughter, my aunt, with husband and son, escaped. They were taken out of Berlin in a cattle car through France into Spain. And they were in Spain in turn for about a year, and then they came over to the United States.
Mm-hmm. So somehow they all were able
to get out.
To get out.
Well, we had, my father had a cousin who emigrated to the United States in the 1870s, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they had 11 children, and they were very fortunate with them. They were all became very wealthy. And so somehow or other we all got out.
With their help?
Yeah.
Where were they living in the States?
They lived in Wabash, Indiana.
Of all places. Getting back to your childhood in Furth and your growing up until the Nazi time, how observant were you? What was your life like?
My life was very easy. Since I said already I was very spoiled. And my parents tried to make the life for me as possible and as regular as it could be. We went on vacation, of course, every summer and tried to go abroad for that. But other than that, we lived in town. And my father was very well liked in town and very well known. And therefore, we had personally very little trouble.
Did you go to public school?
I went to public school. I was in the last grade that graduated from the city high school. But I graduated, but I was not allowed to attend the graduation ceremonies.
What year was that?
1936.
So you finished in the public school?
Yes.
But could not attend.
And I had really wanted to. Schools were different in Germany. They had 6th grade was one finishing up and the other was the 9th grade. If you wanted to go to a university, you had to have 9 grades of schooling. And the school that I went to was strictly a girls' school and went only to 36, for me. And I had really wanted to go on to the other school to get a degree there because I wanted to study medicine. Mm-hmm. But never got there.
You were not able to enter. Did you have friends?
Yes, I had a lot of friends, and
among the non-Jewish as well.
Yeah, Jewish friends, of course, we stuck together. But I had a lot of Gentile friends too, due to my father's belonging to a lot of organizations. And then we had lived in a house where people were all very nice. We were on the 1st floor. You want me to?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And there was one family in particular that lived on the 3rd floor. And she was about my age, and we used to walk together to the high school. Hitler was elected, I'll never forget that date, on the 6th of March, 1933, which was my mother's birthday. And on this, which was a Sunday. And Monday morning, I was waiting for the girl from upstairs to come. We would walk together, and she never came. She finally sent me a letter, found my address through the Jewish Holocaust Museum in Furth about a year ago, because she had been trying to get hold of me but never could. First of all, with my maiden name, she didn't get much anywhere. She didn't know my married name. And she wrote in a letter, which is enclosed, that she herself waited upstairs till the front door on the 1st floor closed, so she knew that I had left, so she did not have to walk with a Jewish girl. She was afraid to be seen with a Jewish person.
And this letter you are giving to the museum.
Yes.
And we will show this letter later at the end of the interview.
Yeah.
So life changed after Hitler.
Very much.
Came to power.
Yeah.
Your father, was he able to continue?
Yes, but
working?
naturally he continued because he had companies that had been with him for 20 years, no, not 20 years, but almost. And but
Companies
others
that he supplied.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He manufactured drugs from the beginning. Over there, you use mostly liquid drugs,
Mm-hmm.
and he manufactured those.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was left alone, actually, on the whole.
And your life, did you continue to attend synagogue?
Yes.
Nothing was changed.
No, nothing was changed as far as I was concerned.
So after you graduated high school, what did you do?
My father wanted to make a lab technician out of me. And he had all the equipment for it. So he tried to teach me in the morning. In the afternoon, our sports club was always in session, which interested me much more. And my mother, who wanted to make a secretary out of me, well, one of them had to give up on that.
Uh-huh. So was this a Jewish sports club?
Yeah, which was formed after 1933 because we had been thrown out of everything else.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't attend anything, but our parents and people in the city thought we should have some outlet.
Mm-hmm.
So we had all the teachers happened to be Jewish, but those were all volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very good. We went even skiing in the winter,
Mm-hmm.
Where the skiing instructor went to small villages in the Bavarian Alps, and he told the people if they would rent out all their beds just to us, then he would rent it, which he did. So we had no trouble there because it was all Jewish involved, you might say.
And then you met your future husband.
Yes, my future husband had been working for my father. He graduated as an engineer at the at the Ulm University, you might call it.
Ulm.
Ulm, H-O-M. O-H-M, I'm sorry.
O-H-M. Mm-hmm.
In Nuremberg, and but in that time, nobody would employ anymore a Jewish engineer. So his uncle and aunt, who were my parents' best friends, asked my father if he would employ him. And he said, sure. So he worked for my father for 5 years until the famous 9th of November, 1938.
Well, prior to that, you were married. What was your husband's name?
Rudy, R-U-D-Y, in Germany with an I.
Mm-hmm.
Stahl, S-T-A-H-L.
Mm-hmm. And when were you married?
August 21st, 1938.
Tell us what happened then.
Well, after that, at first life went on normally because my parents were involved in so many things. So.
And in your picture album, you actually went on a honeymoon. I saw there were photographs in your album.
What
you and Rudy were able to go on a honeymoon.
Oh yeah, we went on a honeymoon. That was the only Jewish hotel that still existed in Germany. It was in Friedrichsroda in the Harz Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And we went there for our honeymoon.
So that was August, what date?
That was for the end of August.
End of August, and then came November 1938.
Yeah. And that was
3 months.
Until then, we had no problems. And that night itself, we had no problem either, because my father had you might call him a friend, who knew him very well. He was always helpful as far as city things were concerned. He got my father an apartment when he got married, when it was very hard in Germany to find an apartment because a lot of them had been destroyed during the war.
Mm-hmm.
And
First World War.
And he knew us well enough. So while everybody else in town was taken out of their apartments, the apartments destroyed, the houses destroyed.
You're now talking about the 9th of November,
Yeah.
1938.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't know anything about it. When in the morning when we woke up, a neighbor came over and said to my father and my husband, we lived with my parents after our wedding, after our marriage, because we knew we were going to leave Germany, and there was no sense for that short time to establish a home. So when she came over, she saw him and said, "What are you doing here?" My father, very innocently, since he didn't know what had happened during the night, said, "I live here, as you know." And then she told us what had happened. And my dad said to my husband, "Let's go and get the car." Because in Germany, at least in our town, at night you could not park in the street. The car had to be in a garage. So at the factory was a garage, and that's where our car was. And while they were going over there, they were picked up by some brown shirts, and they took them to the place where they had assembled all the male Jewish aliens. They had taken them during the night to a place, Albert Leo Schlagederplatz. It's now called Further Freiheit. And
Like a school or?
no, it was a common place. That is where the first train from Nuremberg to Furth, which was the first train in Germany, went from one city to the other.
So it was an outdoor place?
It was an outdoor place.
I see.
Not far from the synagogue, where the Nazis very nicely told all the members at night when they had them there, that's, the synagogue was in flames, that's where you're going to end up too.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the morning they released all the women and children, sent them home, and took the men to a big hall donated by a German Jew, of course, and kept them there until the late afternoon, when they put them on buses and then on the train to Dachau. In between, where was I now?
Your husband
Yeah.
and your father were
taken then
in
to
the
that
street.
building too, where all the others were. And when they brought him in, this one guy in SS black shirt uniform says, "Doctor, I happen to know that you have diabetes. One reason I can send you home. Go." And my father said to my husband, "Come on, Rudy, let's go." But the guy said, "That I can't do." And then my father, not knowing what was ahead, said, "I'm staying too." But the guy said, "No, you go," and told some brown shirts to throw him out. The guy that did that was this former friend of my father's, who was the head of the SS unit in Furth. But since he knew my father, he liked him too well, he didn't want him there.
So
That's how he came home,
So your father came home.
and was never in Dachau.
And what happened to Rudy and the other men?
Rudy and all the others were taken to Dachau, and my husband came home after 5 weeks, because the SS came one morning, the SA came one morning to my father and said, "Doctor, the new owner, they had taken the factory away from my father during the night, actually, and taken the car and everything. But the new owner does not know what to do, so we want you to show him." So my father said, "Well, this has upset me too much. If you want somebody to help, get my son-in-law. He has worked there for 5 years. He knows what to do." So that's how he came out.
So they released Rudy
Yeah.
for that reason. Did Rudy describe his life and what happened in
He never
Dachau?
spoke about it.
Pardon?
He never spoke about it, what happened in Dachau. That was a mute thing between us. But I do happen to know some of what happened, because Jack Thalheimer, who used to live
Yes.
here, his father was at the same time also in Dachau, and he described a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things, how cruel they were, there was one, he was a very well-known jeweler in Nuremberg, actually. He had there was no Jewish hospital in Nuremberg, but we had one in Furth. And he had had gallbladder surgery in the morning. And they pulled him that night out of camp and dragged him along to the place.
Out of the hospital?
Out of the hospital. And he collapsed and died right there.
Mm-hmm. So Rudy was released, and how did you
Meanwhile,
then...
I had bought the London Times every day to find jobs. And there was one thing: you could get out to England as domestic help. They were very short of domestics, mm-hmm. and they were welcomed them actually. So we got a job through the Times as domestic couple. Rudy was supposed to do the driving, the hard work, the yard work and all that, and I was supposed to do the cooking, and mm-hmm. I didn't know to cook.
Oh. So
but it worked out all right.
This was your way to get out.
Out, yes.
How interesting. And you ended up where?
In Hastings near Dover in England. Mm-hmm. And my brother-in-law ended up in Eastbourne. We got him out for something else, also for...
this was Rudy's brother.
Yeah, Rudy's brother. And he was in Eastbourne and worked for a cleaning service. And it is about 35 to 50 miles from where we were. So we visited him quite often.
What was his name?
Gerald
mm-hmm.
Stoll.
He was younger. How old was Gerald?
Gerald was born in 22, so he was 16.
In 1938, he was 16.
16.
Was he also taken to Dachau?
No. He lived in Berlin. And in Berlin, you could get away. Mm-hmm. Like his parents and they were hiding in the woods mm-hmm. till the worst was over. And when he got to England, he worked. And but then after... Well, they told everybody it would be only when they arrested him in England, would be only for a few days.
The English arrested him?
Yes, they interned him. They took them first to a place near London, Huyton near London, and then they took them to the Isle of Man. They were sure they couldn't get away from there so easily.
So by them, you mean both Rudy and Gerald?
Were interned, and as luck would have it, on the Isle of Man they were together.
So what was the pretense of the arrest?
They were afraid of spies. In the beginning of the war, they had tribunals in England. They classified the aliens in 1, B, and C class. A was interned immediately because they were not quite kosher.
They were definitely considered spies, or?
Not necessarily, but they weren't sure whether they were or not. Mm-hmm. And B was free inside the city where you lived. I mean, we could get around anywhere in Brighton, but we could not leave the city unless we told the police where we were going. Mm-hmm. At the time, we didn't have any time for that, so it didn't matter to us. Mm-hmm. And C, which we were at first, and then they changed us over to Class C, which they called Friendly Enemy Aliens, refugees from Nazi oppression. And we could do anything we wanted.
That was your classification?
That was my classification.
Mm-hmm. But then what happened?
Pardon me?
But nevertheless, they took Rudy.
Well, they were afraid. And that was, I can understand it, because when we went by car, for example, from Brighton to Eastbourne to visit my brother-in-law, which is all along the south coast, along the channel, there was not one gun anywhere to be seen. There was nothing. If the Germans had walked in there, they could have run over England.
How long were the men on the Isle of Man?
It depended. Now, if you had your visas for the US and could get transportation, they would let you out as soon as possible. But on the other hand, my brother-in-law, who did not have any idea of moving to the States, he was too young to make up his mind anyway. And there was an aunt of Rudy's who lived in Manchester, and she guaranteed for him, but he stayed on the Isle of Man for 13 months.
That is Gerald. Rudy.
That was Gerald.
Gerald.
Yeah.
And how long did Rudy stay?
Rudy was there for 3 months.
And what did they do there on the Isle of Man?
Nothing.
But they were fed and...
They were fed, and they did. There were some people that were... There was a very well-known Rabbi Dünner, and it reminds me, I have this here is Alfred Dünner Wehr.
Oh.
He has it, it's the name over here. I don't even know whether they were relatives or not.
Oh.
But he was very well known, and he organized a lot of things. And there were others who did that.
And so you got to England. Let's leave you there for the moment. What happened to your parents?
My parents had applied for the United States too, but they gave out numbers. And we had a relatively low number. We had confirmation from the American consulate our number would be called in December 1939. But that's another story. But my parents had a much higher number, so they couldn't get out that fast. So where were they going was a big question. Now, my mother had a cousin in Dublin who was an MD and who told them they could come and live with them.
In Ireland?
In Ireland. But my father didn't like the idea too much of living and, with someone. Then he had a cousin in Israel who heard about that, and he sent the money that he could over the guarantee to the Israeli government that he was self-supporting to this cousin in Ireland for my parents. And then my father got his visa because they gave the visas to men. Because they figured they were in more danger than women and children. So my mother didn't get a visa, even though she had been born in Berlin as an English citizen, actually. Because my great-grandfather started in linen factory in Northern Ireland in Belfast, which is documented in a book, The Jews of Ireland.
So your mother's grandfather had lived in Ireland.
Yeah, he lived there.
And was an Irish citizen.
Yeah.
And started a linen factory in Ireland.
In Ireland.
Okay, so then your mother's mother, was it his
through marriage, she became an Irish citizen.
Oh.
My mother's mother was born in Germany.
Yes, this daughter of this great-grandfather.
Yeah, the granddaughter.
No, the
great-grandfather, granddaughter,
and his,
And what we didn't know at the time is that actually she could have had an Irish passport because the Irish ruling is like in Israel, the return to the land. And anyone who had up to grandfather, I think it went, an Irish forebear could get back to Ireland and immediately got Irish citizenship.
And she didn't realize she didn't know privilege.
That. But then my mother had been in a sanitarium she had had pneumonia for a long time near Munich. And there was also at the same time an Irish clergyman. And both he and my mother liked to walk, and it so happened they walked a great deal together. And so when all this came about, my mother still remembered his name and his address, and she wrote to him if he could help my mother to get to Ireland. So he went to the government and told them that as human beings, you do not have the right to separate a marriage. So my mother came to Ireland, and they spent 11 months there.
Very interesting. Now, back to you and Rudy. How did you then come to the United States? How were you able to?
Well, that's a long story too.
You had a low number.
We had a low number.
Meant a low number for entry into the United States?
Yes.
Quota.
Yeah, quota number. We got that in Stuttgart, which was our closest place. And we didn't hear from them. And whenever we tried to get to the consulate or hear from them, we wrote to them, and anything, we never heard. So after the fall of Dunkirk, anyone on the South Coast had to leave the South Coast within 24 hours. Where do I go?
Oh, after Dunkirk.
Dunkirk. They had arrested Rudy and left me. And so where do I go? Now Rudy had some cousins of his father, I think it was, that lived in London, and I knew the address and the name. And I wrote to them, or called them, I think. I said, can you get me a place? I have enough money to stay some time there, but can you get me a place so I can put my head down to sleep? And they said, no, we don't do that, because you certainly come to us. We have plenty of room, and you stay with us. I stayed with them for about 6 weeks. They were wonderful. And then it was very funny too. I had a gallbladder attack while I had had one already in Brighton, and I had another one in London. And they insisted that I go to see their family doctor. So one of the sons went with me, and I walk into the waiting room first and then go into be called. And I go in there, and the doctor is still scribbling on his desk. He puts his head up and gets a shock. He says, Ilse Schwab.
He knew you.
He was the assistant doctor to our family doctor in Furth.
Really?
So that was that. And then I went, while I was in London, I went to the consulate. And at the American consulate, which is on a beautiful corner on Grosvenor Square, on one side, on one entrance, was a woman. She was huge, and unless she moved to the side, you couldn't get in. On the other side was a policeman or guard. He wouldn't let you in either unless you had papers that you had been called. So friends of these relatives again, were working, had export and import with the States, I don't know which. And they arranged it that when the secretary had to go to the consulate with the papers, that I would go with her. We met about a block before the consulate. She handed me a briefcase. She went in one entrance and I went in the other. And we met on the inside. And she said to the people, she knew most of them because she was there quite often. She said it would be a favor to her employer if they would check the papers. Then they looked at the card and said, December. And then they came back and said, we can't find your papers. And then because of the card that I had from them, which they had confirmed, that I would be called in December 39. They looked some further and they found our numbers misplaced in a much higher number. So then they took me to either consul or vice consul, one of the big shots. And he said, well, you certainly have the right immediately. I said, how about my husband? He sits on the Isle of Man meanwhile. So he said, get transportation, and we will see that he gets to Liverpool and gets on the ship. So the next day I walked around on, well, I can't think of the name of the street anymore. There is one air shipping company next to the other. And I walked in, out, till I came to furnace line, which I had never heard in my life before, but they used to go to India all the time. Anyway, they had a ship leaving with British children under the Red Cross that same Friday. And they still had a few openings because who knew of furnace line? So I got the reservation, and I went back to Woburn House, which Bloomsbury House was called then. And we had put a deposit down for our passage to the United States when we came to England. We were told it was the best way to make sure that we had it all together. And Bloomsbury House was very nice, and they said, which line, Canadian Pacific or Cunard? I said, no, it's furnace line. We don't know that line, we don't pay for them. I said, give me out my own money. Oh no, we don't do that. So here I was again. So I also knew that this distant relative had worked as a volunteer for years at Woburn House.
What was Woburn House? It's famous. What is Woburn House
Woburn
in London?
House.
Yes.
That is now, what is it? I mentioned it once before.
It was the place where
the refugees came and registered. And if they needed help, they got help from them. And they looked out, I mean, kind of. Because a lot of people came and had nothing. And they needed a place
so it
for
was like
help.
Jewish family services.
Oh, it was, yeah. Like JCC on that order. And so I called her and I said, what do I do now? She said, well, I happen to know the president of Woburn. What's the phone number where you're calling from? I call you back in a few minutes. I got the money, needless to say, and I went to the furnace line and paid for our tickets. Then I packed and got everything together. And I called the doctor too, because I wanted some medicine in case I needed something. And he came to the station with all of us. And he said, I want to give you a shot so you be comfortable in case you get seasick or what have you. Well, I slept through that whole night while there was an air raid going on. They were trying to catch that train going to Glasgow, which I was on. Everybody in the morning came out with worn out, because they hadn't slept during the night. They had taken the train to a side rail or something, and everybody had to disembark except I, because I was asleep. And in the morning, the porter came up with the early morning cup of tea, which was at least usual at the time. And he said, I understand you slept through the night. Didn't you hear all the bombing and everything? I didn't. Then we arrived at Glasgow, and normally there were a lot of porters there because all the people had a lot of luggage and they were glad to make the money. That morning, because of the air raid, there was nobody there. So everybody, how do we get to the ship? Well, I didn't know any of the people, but I was very fresh. And so, because I'd slept, so I went into the countryside, walked over, and I saw a farmer there with a cart, and I forgot whether he had oxen or horses, whichever. And I asked him if he would go in and pick up my things and take them to the ship. I would pay him whatever he wanted. He said, sure. And he would have even taken me on the cart, but I felt like walking, and I walked back to the train station. And when I got to the train station, the guy was loading up his truck with everybody's luggage, and mine was still sitting down in the street. I said, look, you can take whatever you want, but mine is going on. So mine went on, and a lot of people were very mad at me, but I couldn't help that. then we
You
got
had
on the
found
ship
him.
that had
Now,
alre-
was that in Glasgow,
In Glasgow.
or Liverpool? You
Glasgow.
had mentioned earlier Liverpool.
Yeah, because Isle of Man was opposite of Liverpool.
I see.
And they said we'd see whatever that he get by train to Glasgow,
I see.
that he'd be on the ship. And the ship was kind of dangerous looking. All the lifeboats were already down all around the ship, and so forth. It was kind of an eerie atmosphere, especially in early morning. And then it so happened another couple from our town, distant relatives actually of Rudy's, were going to be on the same ship. And we all met and talked, and then he appeared. He had been on the Isle of Man too.
This man.
But Rudy didn't come. I said, where is he? The English won't let him go, they lost his passport.
Oh my.
Yeah, it wasn't such an easy thing to get out for us. And therefore Rudy came 4 months later.
Oh, he was not on the ship with you.
He was not on the ship. So, and
Well.
then these relatives too, they were so, forward-minded. They knew what to do, which a lot of the people that were on the ship with me, besides the children under the Red Cross, they had sent out from London already wires to relatives, we are coming on Furnace Line, blah, blah, blah. And the English would censor, of course, these radio messages and wouldn't let them through because it endangered the ship.
I see.
So these relatives again, they waited until they figured I was in American waters, you know, the 200-mile limit. And then sent a telegram to my parents, who were already over here.
Already here.
They'd come 2 months before.
From Ireland.
And told them to get in touch with Furnace Line to find out when the ship's going to come in. And my parents were the only people that were on the pier when we pulled in.
Really? No. And then, how did you come to Richmond?
Well, Rudy's oldest brother, Henry, who had been here a few months before, had been resettled by hires to Richmond.
I see.
And when Rudy came in, it was the eve of Rosh Hashanah. So he felt he would like to be together with his brother. So we came to Richmond, and there was a family, you know, Bloch, Emil Bloch.
Yes.
They rented out rooms in their house, and Henry was living with them, and they rented a room to us too until we found where we were going, and we stayed with them, and they belonged to Bethel Harbor, and we went there in the morning then to services.
So you pretty much immediately came
Yeah.
to Richmond.
We never wanted to stay in New York.
Actually, Henry came,
First.
was in Richmond and was very active here.
Yeah.
And Gerald also got his education in Richmond
right.
at the medical college.
Yeah.
And Rudy,
Didn't need it.
he had his education. And where did he work in Richmond?
The funny part was he found an ad somewhere, a company called J.C. Muller Incorporated Tobacco Machinery Manufacturers. And it was still owned at that time by the German company. But he went there and applied, and the manager was also German. And when he saw his papers, he had his journeyman training for 3 years. He had his graduation papers as engineer. He knew what he could do, and he employed him immediately. So he had immediately a job. I think it was 61 cents an hour at the time.
And later, Rudy became at Bethel.
Yeah, because it was too reformed.
You joined Bethel.
Yeah. The services of Bethel, well, are some things that are towards real Orthodox and some things even towards reform. And actually people here, when they say Bethel, they talk about German Jewry, they call conservative really reform already.
Mm-hmm.
But we still all, the men wear hats or yarmulkes. They all wear their talise.
At Bethel.
Yeah, like Bethel.
And
but women and men could sit together, which was a harbor-like, so it was a mixture.
Mm-hmm. And eventually Rudy became president.
Yes.
What year? Do you remember the year he was president
Yes,
of Bethel?
I think it was 63 to 65,
Mm-hmm.
or 62 to 64.
Yes, and you have children.
Yes, I have two sons.
Mm-hmm.
Frank was born in 1942. Richard was born in 1945.
In Richmond.
They were born both in Richmond. Frank still lives here. He's a CPA with his own office. And Richard is a lawyer in Fairfax, Virginia.
And they have children? Tell us.
Frank has two girls. One is...
Their names?
Stephanie is the older one, and Jerry is the younger one.
And Richard?
Richard Ronit is the older one, then comes Danielle, and then finally came a grandson.
And his
Jonathan.
name? Jonathan. You brought some materials with you, Ilse.
Yes.
The first is the book on the table. Would you tell us about this book?
This book was...
Yes.
You want that out?
No, you may turn to that page later.
All right. This book was sent to me from someone in Germany. It is actually for sale there.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody sent it to me. It is called Gedenkbuch. In here are pictures of over 2,000 Jews that died in the concentration camps. Wherever they could get pictures, they put pictures in. And whenever there's no picture, I mean, they didn't get the picture, but they have the names and dates of everyone.
And these were the Jews of Nuremberg.
Yeah, of Nuremberg that died in the concentration camps.
Mm-hmm. And here, I'm going to ask you to stand up and try not to cover what is on this easel.
Wait, I can't.
And, oh, okay. I'll hold this. Go ahead. And point to the pictures and tell us who these people are. I'm afraid you're in front of them right there. Let's see. Okay. How is that for the camera? Is that all right? Okay. Who are we looking at? Go ahead.
Where shall I start, top or bottom? This is my father. He, towards the end of his life, actually.
Mm-hmm.
This is when he was in the army. This is 1918. This is 1914. And this is my mother.
Mm-hmm. And this also
This is my
your
mother too, and this is my husband.
This is Rudy.
Yeah.
So your father was in the First World War, and this is the whole time.
Well, he was not at the front, but he was in the, like what we call mages here, as pharmacist.
Actually, this is a larger picture of him in full dress uniform. Now, tell us about this letter. You started to in your interview.
This letter, shall I translate it now?
Yes, just very generally, please translate it.
It says, well, it has her address here. It says, Dear Ilse, I have looked for you for a long time, and I finally found your address. I am sitting now in front of an empty paper, and it's very hard for me to start this letter. I am the little girl who played with you in the backyard on Bahnhofsplatz 1 in Furth. I'm the Erika Kohler from the third floor. I have looked for you, and why? Because I wanted to tell you how sorry I am that I lost the contact. Wait a minute, I can't read this. Can I?
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry that. Wait a minute. I have looked for you for a long time because I wanted to tell you how sorry I am that I lost contact with you. And
Why don't you sit down?
yeah, I think I need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we need a tissue.
You want me to start that all over?
No, that's fine.
Okay. I just want to. I looked for you because I wanted to tell you how sorry I am and how sorry I've been that I lost contact with you. And this was for without telling you. I was living in the 3rd floor, and we used to go together to school. I lived on the 3rd floor, and after Hitler came, I waited in front of my door until your door on the 1st floor closed, because I was afraid to be seen with a Jewish girl. Mm-hmm. I was afraid to show myself with you because you were a Jew, and I'm ashamed that I did that. Please forgive me. I'm very sorry. I even cry very often about this. I would like to very much to see you if you want to and if it is possible.
Thank you, Ilse. I think your story is one that speaks to the strength of family ties and the importance of family staying in touch and supporting each other. And also to your resourcefulness. You bought the London Times and found jobs in England for yourself and Rudy.
Well, sometimes when you have to do something, you do.
Yes, this incident with the briefcase that allowed you entry into the Woburn House. Then the furnace line, you found the shipping company that gave you transport.
Well, you know, there are a lot of things you do when you have to, which normally you wouldn't do.
Well, not everybody did those things, and they didn't get out.
Well, that's true.
And then you found the farmer with the cart who took your baggage. So thank you very, very much for your interview and for sharing your story.
Yeah, I was glad to do it.